Billionaire was on duty when he saved a baby girl, and froze when he learned she was his ex's daughter. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The fluorescent lights of Seattle General's trauma wing hummed their familiar tune as Dr. Cale Whittemore adjusted his surgical mask for what felt like the 100th time that night. At 37, his hands remained as steady as they were 15 years ago when he first picked up a scalpel, but tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the storm brewing outside, or maybe it was the anniversary approaching. 1 year since Aurora walked out of his life. Cale's reflection caught in the window of the break room as he poured his 4th cup of coffee. Tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his scrubs perfectly, he had the kind of presence that made residents step aside in hallways. His dark hair, always perfectly styled even during the longest shifts, framed piercing blue eyes that could diagnose a patient's condition with a single glance. The white coat draped over his muscular frame bore his name embroidered in navy thread, Dr. Cale Whittemore, Chief of Neurosurgery. But beneath the polished exterior, exhaustion weighed on him like lead. The Whittemore Medical Research Foundation had just secured another $100 million grant for pediatric neurological studies, making headlines in medical journals across the country. Everyone called him brilliant, innovative, a visionary who was revolutionizing children's brain surgery. What they didn't know was that he couldn't sleep at night. Dr. Whittemore, Nurse Jennifer's voice cracked through the intercom. Emergency in Trauma Bay 3. Infant in respiratory distress. Cale's coffee cup hit the counter with a sharp clink. He was already moving, muscle memory taking over as his mind shifted into the razor-sharp focus that had made him legendary in operating rooms from Boston to Los Angeles. His Italian leather shoes, a gift from his late father, clicked against the polished hospital floors as he strode down the corridor. The trauma bay erupted in controlled chaos when he arrived. Paramedics surrounded a tiny form on the gurney, their voices overlapping in rapid-fire medical terminology. 4-month-old female, found unresponsive by mother approximately 20 minutes ago. Possible aspiration, complete airway obstruction. We've attempted suctioning, but move aside. Cale's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone stepped back instinctively, recognizing the authority in his tone. The baby lay motionless, her tiny chest barely rising. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Cale's stomach clench. She couldn't have weighed more than 12 pounds, with wispy brown hair that caught the overhead lights and skin so pale it was almost translucent. Prep for emergency intubation, he ordered, his hands already moving to examine her throat. And get me a pediatric bronchoscope. Now. The next 15 minutes blurred together in a symphony of beeping monitors, barked orders, and the delicate precision required to save a life so small. Cale's fingers worked with the mechanical perfection of someone who had performed this procedure countless times, but his heart hammered against his ribs in a way that surprised him. When the baby's oxygen levels finally stabilized and her color returned to a healthy pink, the trauma bay fell silent except for the steady rhythm of her breathing on the ventilator. "Beautiful work, doctor," whispered Dr. Martinez, the attending physician. "You saved her life." Cale nodded curtly, stripping off his gloves with practiced efficiency. "Keep her monitored. I want blood work, chest x-rays, and a full neurological assessment. If there's any sign of brain damage from oxygen deprivation." "Doctor!" The trauma bay doors burst open, and a woman stumbled in, her face streaked with tears and rain from the storm outside. "Where is she? Where's my baby?" Cale's world stopped. The voice hit him like a physical blow, so familiar it made his breath catch in his throat. He turned slowly, dreading what he would see but unable to stop himself. Aurora Wren stood in the doorway, her auburn hair disheveled and her green eyes wild with panic. She wore a paint-stained sweater over jeans, and her hands shook as she reached toward the gurney where her daughter lay sleeping. She hadn't seen him yet. Her entire focus was on the tiny form surrounded by medical equipment, and she rushed forward with the desperate urgency of a mother whose world had almost collapsed. "Oh, Izzy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mommy's here. Mommy's here, sweetheart." Cale's throat went dry. His feet felt rooted to the floor as he watched Aurora gently stroke the baby's forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. The tenderness in her touch, the way she spoke to the child, it was the same gentleness she had once shown him. But who was this baby? And why did seeing Aurora holding her feel like a knife twisting in his chest? "Ma'am, you can't be in here right now, Doctor," Martinez said gently, approaching Aurora with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "The baby is stable, but we need to run some tests." "Tests?" Aurora's voice cracked. "What kind of tests? Is she going to be okay? Please, someone tell me she's going to be okay." Cale knew he should leave, should walk out of the trauma bay and let another doctor handle the family consultation. But something kept him frozen in place, watching as Aurora cradled the baby's tiny hand in hers. That's when Aurora looked up and saw him. Her green eyes widened, and all the color drained from her face. For a moment that felt like an eternity. They stared at each other across the sterile hospital room, while machines beeped softly in the background. "Cale?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The baby stirred in her sleep, making a soft sound that broke the spell. Aurora immediately turned her attention back to the child, but Cale could see her hands trembling even more now. "You saved her," Aurora said without looking at him again. "Didn't you?" He wanted to speak, but no words would come. Instead, he found himself stepping closer to the gurney, his eyes fixed on the baby's peaceful face. She had Aurora's delicate features, but something about the shape of her eyes seemed familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. "What's her name?" he finally managed to ask. "Isadora," Aurora whispered. "Her name is Isadora." The name hung in the air between them like a question neither was ready to answer. Cale's mind raced, calculating dates and possibilities, but he forced himself to stop thinking like a doctor and start feeling like a man who had just encountered the woman he'd never stopped loving, and her baby. But as he stared down at little Isadora's sleeping face, one thought echoed in his mind with terrifying clarity. How old was this child? And why did Aurora look so afraid to meet his eyes? Would you have recognized your own child in that moment? Or would fear have blinded you too? Aurora's hands trembled as she brushed a strand of hair away from Isadora's forehead, careful not to disturb the tiny oxygen monitor clipped to her daughter's finger. The beeping machines created a rhythmic soundtrack that somehow made the silence between her and Cale even more deafening. "I need to examine her more thoroughly," Cale said finally, his voice professionally distant. But Aurora could hear the underlying tension. There might be complications from the oxygen deprivation that won't show up immediately. She nodded without looking at him, her green eyes fixed on Isadora's peaceful face. "Do whatever you need to do. Just, please make sure she's okay." Dr. Martinez cleared his throat awkwardly. "Dr. Whittemore, perhaps Dr. Chen should handle this case? You've been on shift for 18 hours already and—" "I've got it." Cale's tone brooked no argument. "Transfer the baby to pediatric ICU. I want round-the-clock monitoring." As the medical team prepared to move Isadora, Aurora finally stood up straight and faced Cale directly. Even exhausted and terrified, she was breathtaking. Her auburn hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her artistic eye was evident in everything from the way she'd instinctively arranged herself next to the gurney to create the most comforting presence for her daughter, to the paint-stained silver bracelet she still wore, the one he'd given her for her 33rd birthday. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving her. I know you didn't have to take this case personally." Cale's jaw tightened. "Every child deserves the best care available. That's not what I meant, and you know it." Their eyes locked, and for a moment the sterile hospital room faded away. Aurora saw the same intense blue gaze that used to study her as she painted in the morning light streaming through the windows of his penthouse apartment. The same eyes that would soften when she'd catch him watching her. The same ones that had gone cold the last time they spoke. "How old is she?" Cale asked, his voice carefully neutral. Aurora's breath caught. 4 months. "Her father isn't in the picture," Aurora interrupted, lifting her chin with the same defiant strength that had first attracted him to her at that gallery opening 2 years ago. "It's just me and Izzy." Cale's mind raced through calculations he didn't want to make. 3 months old, which meant Aurora would have been pregnant when they broke up, would have been carrying his— No. He stopped himself. He couldn't think like that. Not without proof. Not when his entire world felt like it was shifting on its axis. "We need to move her now," announced Nurse Jennifer, positioning herself at the head of Isadora's gurney. "Pediatric ICU is ready." Aurora instinctively reached for her daughter's hand, but Cale stepped between them. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. Hospital protocol requires—" "Her name is Aurora," she said firmly, "and she's my daughter. I'm not stepping back." The authority in Cale's voice wavered for just a moment. Aurora had always been the only person who could challenge him without flinching, the only one who saw past his reputation and demanding the man underneath. Even now, exhausted and afraid, she stood her ground with the same fierce protectiveness that had made her defend struggling artists in her gallery, even when it cost her sales. "Aurora," he said more gently, "you can follow us to the PICU, but you can't interfere during the transfer. If something goes wrong—" "Something already went wrong," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "My 4-month-old baby stopped breathing in her crib tonight. She turned blue in my arms while I was calling 911. So don't tell me about hospital protocol when my daughter almost died." The raw pain in her voice hit Cale like a physical blow. He'd seen Aurora cry before, when her grandmother passed away, when she'd lost her biggest client to a gallery in New York. But this was different. This was the primal fear of a mother who had almost lost everything. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. Follow us." As they moved through the hospital corridors, Cale found himself stealing glances at Aurora. She looked thinner than he remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. Her clothes were wrinkled, and there was dried paint under her fingernails, sage green and burnt orange, the colors she always used when she was stressed. The pediatric ICU was a stark contrast to the chaotic trauma bay, with soft lighting and walls painted in calming pastels. Isadora was transferred to a private room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle gleamed in the distance, a reminder of all the times Cale and Aurora had watched the sunset from his apartment terrace. "Dr. Whittemore?" The pediatric nurse looked up from checking Isadora's IV line. "Should I add the mother to the approved visitor list?" "Of course," Cale replied immediately. 24-hour access. Aurora looked surprised. "Thank you. She's your daughter," he said simply, then added, "I'll be checking on her every few hours. If you need anything at all, have them page me." "Cale, wait." Aurora's voice stopped him at the doorway. "Why are you doing this? Taking such personal interest in her case?" He turned back, studying her face in the soft light of the PICU. She was sitting in the reclining chair next to Isadora's crib, her hand resting protectively on the baby's chest, feeling for each breath. "Because," he said carefully, "any child who fights that hard to live deserves a doctor who will fight just as hard to keep her alive." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. As Cale walked toward the elevator, his mind churned with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. In his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting and a conference call with investors in Tokyo. The Whittemore Foundation had 3 new research grants to review, 2 hospital wings to inspect, and a charity gala to attend over the weekend. But all he could think about was the way Isadora's tiny hand had curled around Aurora's finger, and the mathematical certainty that was slowly taking shape in his mind. 4 months old. Their breakup had been exactly 12 months ago, which meant the elevator doors opened, and Dr. Chen stepped out, nearly colliding with Cale in his distracted state. "Rough night?" Chen asked, noting the exhaustion written across Cale's usually composed features. "You could say that," Cale replied, stepping into the elevator. "The baby you saved earlier, word is she's going to make a full recovery. Nice work." Cale nodded absently, but as the elevator descended toward his office, one thought consumed him. He needed to see that baby's medical records, not as her doctor, but as a man who was beginning to suspect that his entire life had just changed forever. Because if his calculations were correct, little Isadora Wren might be the daughter he never knew he had, and Aurora had been raising her alone for 4 months, believing he didn't want children, while he'd spent the past year trying to forget the only woman he'd ever loved. The elevator reached his floor, but Cale didn't get out. Instead, he pressed the button for the medical records department. Some questions couldn't wait until morning. The medical records department was eerily quiet at 3 in the morning. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across empty desks as Cale used his keycard to access the computer system. His hands, usually so steady during the most delicate surgeries, trembled slightly as he typed in Isadora's patient number. The file loaded slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. When her birth certificate appeared on screen, Cale's breath caught in his throat. Birth date, July 15th. His mind raced backward through the calendar. July 15th meant Aurora would have conceived sometime in October of the previous year, November 20th to be exact. He remembered the date because it was the night before everything fell apart between them. It had been Aurora's gallery exhibition, the biggest night of her career. She'd been radiant in that emerald dress, her eyes sparkling as art collectors and critics praised her latest collection. They'd made love that night with a passion that still haunted his dreams, whispering promises about the future that neither of them knew was about to crumble. Father, unknown. Two simple words that confirmed his worst fear and biggest hope simultaneously. Cale stared at the screen until his eyes burned, then printed the file and tucked it into his jacket. He needed air. He needed space to think. But first, he needed to see Aurora. The walk back to the PICU felt like traversing a minefield. Every step brought him closer to a conversation that would either destroy what remained of his carefully controlled world, or give him a chance at the family he'd convinced himself he didn't want. Aurora was exactly where he'd left her, curled up in the reclining chair beside Isadora's crib. She'd managed to doze off despite the constant beeping of monitors, one hand still resting protectively on her daughter's chest. In sleep, the worry lines around her eyes had softened, and she looked like the woman he'd fallen in love with at that coffee shop near her gallery, paint-stained fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug, lost in thought about her next masterpiece. Couldn't sleep either? Aurora's voice was soft but alert. She'd sensed his presence without opening her eyes. I don't sleep much anymore, Cale admitted, settling into the chair across from her. How is she? Stable. Her oxygen levels have been perfect for the last 2 hours. Aurora finally looked at him and he saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The nurses say she's a fighter. She gets that from her mother. Aurora's laugh was bitter. Right now, I don't feel like much of a fighter. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Cale studied her carefully. Aurora, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Her green eyes sharpened with wariness. What? Is Isadora my daughter? The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Aurora's face went pale and her hand instinctively moved to cover Isadora more protectively. What makes you think? The dates, Aurora. I did the math. She was born July 15th, which means she was conceived in October. November 20th, to be specific. Aurora closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. You remember the exact date? I remember everything about that night. Your exhibition, the way you laughed when that critic from the Times called your work breathtakingly innovative, the way you felt in my arms when we got home. His voice grew quieter. It was the last time we were truly happy together. Cale, just tell me the truth, please. Aurora was quiet for so long that Cale wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, she's yours. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd suspected, had done the math, but hearing it confirmed made the room spin around him. He was a father, had been a father for 3 months without knowing it. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked despite his efforts to stay composed. Aurora's laugh was hollow. I tried, Cale. God, how I tried. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Do you remember what happened the week after my exhibition? When I started feeling sick and thought it might be the flu? Cale's stomach dropped as the memory came flooding back. You were throwing up every morning. Morning sickness. But I didn't know that yet. Aurora turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. When I realized I might be pregnant, I was terrified, but also excited. I kept imagining what you'd say, how we'd figure it out together. Aurora, I called you 17 times, Cale. 17. I left messages saying I needed to talk to you about something important. You were always in surgery, or in a meeting, or traveling to some conference. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by old pain. So I decided to come to your office, to tell you in person. Cale felt like he was going to be sick. What happened? I got there just as Dr. Rodriguez was leaving your office. You didn't see me in the hallway, but I could hear every word you said. Aurora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He was congratulating you on the Hopkins Fellowship offer, saying it was perfect timing since you didn't have any family obligations holding you back, and you laughed, Cale. You actually laughed and said, I said children would be a prison. Cale finished, the memory hitting him like a sledgehammer. That I'd watched too many brilliant doctors lose their edge because they had to rush home to soccer games and school plays. You said you'd never want kids because they'd just tie you down, that your career was your priority, and it always would be. Aurora's voice broke completely. I was standing there with your baby growing inside me, and you might as well have stabbed me in the heart. Cale buried his face in his hands. Aurora, I was talking about Rodriguez. His wife had just given birth and he was complaining about the sleep deprivation affecting his surgical precision. I was trying to make him feel better about— I didn't know that. Aurora's voice rose. Then she quickly lowered it, glancing at Isadora. All I heard was the man I loved saying children were a burden. So I left. And when you broke up with me 2 days later because you said we wanted different things, I took it as confirmation that you'd never want the baby I was carrying. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of Isadora's monitors. Cale felt like he was drowning in regret, in the magnitude of what his thoughtless words had cost them both. I would have stayed, he said finally. If I'd known about her, I would have given up the fellowship, the travel, everything. Would you? Aurora challenged. Or would you have resented us both for trapping you? Cale looked at Isadora sleeping peacefully in her crib, so small and perfect and completely dependent on the adults around her. I don't know, he admitted. The man I was a year ago, I honestly don't know, but I know who I am now, and I know that I want to be her father. Aurora stared at him for a long moment. She almost died tonight, Cale, in my arms, turning blue, and all I could think was that she'd never know her daddy, that I'd robbed her of having a father because I was too proud and too hurt to try again. You're not proud, Aurora. You're strong. And you've been raising our daughter alone because I was too much of a coward to recognize what I really wanted. Our daughter, Aurora repeated softly. It sounds strange hearing you say it. Cale stood up and moved closer to Isadora's crib. In the soft light, he could see his own features reflected in her tiny face, the shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her chin even in sleep. What's she like? He asked. When she's awake, I mean. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Aurora's face softened. She's curious about everything, always looking around trying to grab whatever's in front of her. She loves music. I play classical while I paint, and she'll just lie there listening with this serious expression, like she's analyzing every note. She's going to be brilliant, Cale said with certainty. She already is. Did you know she rolled over last week? The pediatrician said that's early for 3 months. They stood side by side, watching their daughter sleep, and for a moment the past year of pain and misunderstanding faded away. They were just two people who had created something beautiful together, something worth fighting for. But then reality crashed back in. So what happens now? Aurora asked quietly. Cale turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. Now we figure out how to be parents, together. Cale, I'm not asking you to take me back, Aurora. I'm asking you to let me be her father. Let me take care of both of you. I've been taking care of us just fine on my own. The defensive edge in her voice told Cale everything he needed to know about how hard the past year had been for her. I know you have, but you don't have to anymore. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. She needs surgery, doesn't she? That's why you're keeping her here for observation. Cale's medical training warred with his paternal instincts. There's some scarring on her airway from the oxygen deprivation. It's minor, but it could cause problems as she grows. A simple procedure now could prevent complications later. How simple? Outpatient surgery. I'd do it myself. She'd go home the same day. Aurora nodded, tears streaming down her face again. Then we do whatever she needs. As if sensing the tension in the room, Isadora stirred in her sleep, making a soft whimpering sound. Both Cale and Aurora moved toward her simultaneously, their hands bumping as they reached for her at the same time. The touch sent electricity through Cale's entire body. Aurora's skin was as soft as he remembered, and for just a moment, he let himself imagine what it would be like to hold her again. But then Aurora pulled her hand away and the spell was broken. I should let you get some rest, Cale said, stepping back. I'll check on her again in a few hours. Cale? Aurora's voice stopped him at the doorway. Yes? Thank you. For saving her tonight. For everything. He nodded and left before he could say something that would make everything more complicated than it already was. But as he walked toward his office, one thought echoed in his mind. He had a daughter, and somehow he was going to find a way to be the father she deserved, even if it meant rebuilding his entire life from the ground up. 3 days later, Cale found himself standing in the baby section of Target at 7 in the morning, staring at an overwhelming wall of bottles, pacifiers, and products he'd never known existed. His usual confidence, the kind that commanded operating rooms and board meetings, had completely deserted him. Can I help you find something? A young sales associate approached, probably wondering why a man in a $1,000 suit was looking lost among the diaper displays. I need... Cale paused, realizing he didn't even know what he needed. Everything, I suppose. For a 4-month-old baby girl. The associate's eyes lit up. New dad? The words hit Cale unexpectedly hard. Yes, he said quietly. Very new. 20 minutes later, his cart was full of items that seemed both essential and mysterious. Bottles that claimed to reduce colic, blankets made from organic cotton, toys designed to stimulate infant brain development. He'd never felt more out of his depth, not even during his first solo surgery as a resident. His phone buzzed with a text from Aurora. Izzy's awake and asking for food. Well, crying for food. Same thing. Before he could overthink it, Cale typed back, "On my way, want coffee?" The response came quickly. "Please, large, with extra caffeine." Aurora had barely slept since they'd brought Isadora home from the hospital. The surgery had gone perfectly. Cale's hands had never been steadier, but Aurora's anxiety hadn't diminished. She'd moved into the guest room of her small craftsman house in Capitol Hill, keeping the baby monitor volume at maximum and checking on Isadora every 30 minutes. When Cale arrived at Aurora's house, he was struck by how different it was from his sterile penthouse. Plants filled every windowsill, canvases lined the walls in various stages of completion, and the morning light streaming through sheer curtains made everything glow with warmth. This was a home, not just a place to sleep between surgeries. "Doors open," Aurora called from somewhere inside. Cale found her in what had clearly become a makeshift nursery in the living room. A bassinet sat next to the couch, surrounded by burp cloths, baby blankets, and the organized chaos that seemed to follow infants everywhere. Aurora was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Isadora lying on a colorful playmat, both of them looking equally exhausted. "She's been awake since 4, Aurora said without looking up. "I think she's having trouble adjusting to being home." Cale set down the coffee and the bag of baby supplies, then knelt beside them. Isadora was indeed wide awake, her dark eyes so much like Aurora's tracking movement around the room. When she saw Cale, she made a soft gurgling sound. "Hey there, sweetheart," Cale said softly, and Isadora's attention focused completely on him. "Giving Mommy a hard time?" Aurora looked surprised. "She's usually fussy with strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Cale said simply. "I'm her father." The words still felt foreign on his tongue, but saying them out loud made them more real. Aurora watched as he gently picked up Isadora, supporting her head with the natural ease that came from years of handling delicate things with precision. "You're a natural," Aurora observed, though there was something guarded in her voice. "I've held a lot of babies, just never my own." Isadora settled against his chest, her tiny fist grasping at his shirt button. The feeling of her warm weight against him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. All the surgeries he'd performed, all the lives he'd saved, nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming protectiveness that surged through him as he held his daughter. "I bought some things," Cale said, nodding toward the Target bag. "I wasn't sure what you needed." Aurora peered into the bag and pulled out a package of bottles. "These are perfect, actually. I've been trying to get her to take a bottle so I can get more than 2 hours of sleep at a time. Why don't you go shower? Take a nap? I can watch her." "Cale, you don't understand. She hasn't been away from me for more than 20 minutes since we brought her home. I can't just—" "Aurora," his voice was gentle but firm. "I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. I think I can handle feeding a baby." She hesitated, clearly torn between exhaustion and maternal anxiety. "What if she cries? She has this way of crying that makes you think the world is ending. Then I'll figure out why she's crying and fix it, just like any other diagnostic challenge." Despite her worry, Aurora smiled. "She's not a medical case, Cale. She's a baby. She's our baby," he corrected. "And you're dead on your feet. Go. I've got her." Aurora looked between Cale and Isadora, who had fallen asleep against his chest with the contented sigh of a child who felt completely safe. Finally, maternal exhaustion won out over anxiety. "Okay, but if she cries for more than 5 minutes, I'll call you, I promise." Aurora headed upstairs and Cale heard the shower start a few minutes later. He settled into the rocking chair by the window, Isadora still sleeping peacefully in his arms. The morning light caught the highlights in her hair, and he marveled at how something so small could contain such infinite possibility. His phone buzzed with a call from his assistant. "Dr. Whittemore, the board meeting has been moved to 10 a.m. and Dr. Martinez needs to discuss the Hopkins Fellowship decision by Friday. Cancel the board meeting," Cale said quietly, "and tell Dr. Martinez I'm withdrawing my application for Hopkins." "Sir, but the fellowship was not as important as where I am right now. Reschedule everything non-essential for the next 2 weeks. After hanging up, Cale found himself studying Isadora's face, memorizing every detail. She had Aurora's delicate bone structure, but his stubborn chin. Her hands were perfectly formed miniatures, with long fingers that would probably be good for piano or surgery or painting. "What do you think, little one?" he whispered. "Should Daddy stick around for a while?" As if in response, Isadora's eyes fluttered open and she looked directly at him. For a moment that felt suspended in time. Father and daughter regarded each other with mutual curiosity. Then she smiled, her first real smile that wasn't just gas. And Cale felt his entire world shift on its axis. Any doubts he'd had about wanting this, about being ready for fatherhood, evaporated in that instant. This tiny person was his, and he was hers, and nothing else mattered. "There's my girl," he said softly, and Isadora cooed in response, her little hand reaching toward his face. When Aurora came back downstairs an hour later, she found them in the same position. Cale was reading a medical journal with one hand while Isadora slept against his chest, his other hand rubbing gentle circles on her back. "How did it go?" Aurora asked, looking more refreshed than she had in days. "She's perfect. Took the bottle without any fussing, had a diaper change, and has been sleeping ever since." Cale looked up from his journal. "I think she just needed to know someone was watching over her." Aurora settled onto the couch, studying them both. There was something different about Cale, a softness in his expression she'd only seen glimpses of before. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? The whole father thing." "I'm not going anywhere, Aurora. I know I have a lot to prove, and I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I'm not the same man who let you walk away a year ago. People don't just change overnight, Cale. No, they don't. But sometimes they have the right motivation." He looked down at Isadora, then back at Aurora. "I've spent the last year trying to convince myself that I didn't need anything but my career. I was wrong." Aurora was quiet for a long moment. "What about Hopkins? I heard it's the opportunity of a lifetime." "It was. But this is my life now. This is what matters. And when the novelty wears off, when you realize that parenthood is 3 a.m. feedings and teething and temper tantrums and not getting to travel whenever you want, what then?" Cale met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll still be here. Because she's not a novelty, Aurora. She's my daughter, and you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're the mother of my child. That makes you both the most important people in my world, whether we're together or not." Aurora felt tears building behind her eyes. She'd spent so many nights during her pregnancy imagining conversations like this, wondering what it would be like if Cale knew about the baby, if he wanted to be involved. The reality was both better and more complicated than she'd dreamed. "I need time," she said finally, "to figure out what this looks like, how we do this without getting hurt again." Cale finished. "I understand." Isadora chose that moment to wake up and immediately begin fussing, the contented peace of the morning giving way to typical baby demands. Cale stood and began the gentle swaying motion that seemed to be instinctive to parents everywhere. "Hey, what's wrong, sweetheart?" he murmured, but Isadora's cries only intensified. Aurora reached for her. "She's probably hungry again. Babies eat constantly at this age." As Aurora settled into the nursing routine, Cale found himself studying the easy intimacy between mother and daughter. This was the life Aurora had been building without him. Quiet moments, gentle rhythms, the kind of domestic happiness he'd always claimed to find boring. Now it looked like everything he'd never known he wanted. "Cale?" Aurora's voice brought him out of his thoughts. "Yes, thank you. For this morning. I forgot what it felt like to not be the only one responsible for her." "You're not anymore," he said simply. "Whatever happens between us, you're not alone in this anymore." Outside, Seattle was waking up, commuters heading to offices, children walking to school, the normal rhythm of a city in motion. But inside Aurora's little house, time seemed to move differently, measured not in appointments and deadlines but in babies' breaths and quiet conversations, and the tentative rebuilding of trust between two people who had created something beautiful together. And for the first time in a year, Cale felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 2 weeks into their tentative co-parenting arrangement, Cale's life had taken on a rhythm he'd never experienced before. His mornings started not with surgery schedules but with diaper changes and bottle feedings at Aurora's house. His evenings ended not with medical journals, but with reading pediatric development books while Isadora slept on his chest. He was discovering muscles he'd forgotten he had from carrying a baby carrier, and his expensive suits had been relegated to the back of his closet in favor of clothes that could handle spit-up and baby food stains. The change should have felt disruptive, but instead it felt like coming home. That Tuesday morning, Cale arrived at Aurora's house with his usual coffee offering and found her in the kitchen, staring at an opened envelope with a stricken expression. "Aurora? What's wrong?" She looked up and he saw fear in her green eyes. Not the worried mother fear he'd become accustomed to, but something deeper and more desperate. "It's from my landlord," she said, holding up the letter with trembling hands. "He's selling the house. I have 60 days to find a new place." Cale took the letter and scanned it quickly. The language was apologetic but firm. The landlord's daughter was getting married and needed a place to live. Aurora had been a model tenant for 3 years, but family came first. "Okay," Cale said calmly, his mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. "We'll find you something better. Seattle's market is tight, but with my connections—" "You don't understand," Aurora interrupted, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. "I can't afford better. I can barely afford this place, and it's already below market rate because Mr. Patterson has been renting to me since before the neighborhood gentrified." Cale frowned. "What do you mean you can't afford it? Your art sells well. The gallery closed 2 months ago, Cale." Aurora's voice was flat. "Right after Izzy was born. The owner decided to retire and no one wanted to take over a small independent space when the bigger galleries were struggling too." The words hit Cale like a physical blow. "You didn't tell me. When would I have told you? We haven't exactly been in regular contact." Aurora stood up and began pacing the small kitchen, nervous energy radiating from her. "I've been selling pieces online and doing some freelance graphic design work, but it's not enough to cover Seattle rent prices. Not with a baby." Cale watched her pace. Pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed falling into place. The exhaustion he'd attributed to new motherhood, the paint-stained clothes he'd assumed were artistic preference, the way she'd been so careful about every purchase for Isadora. "How long?" he asked quietly. "What? How long have you been struggling financially?" Aurora stopped pacing and leaned against the kitchen counter, her defiance crumbling into vulnerability. "Since about month 7 of my pregnancy. That's when the gallery owner told me about the closure. I thought I had time to figure something out before the baby came, but then Izzy arrived 3 weeks early, and everything just— Why didn't you call me?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, and Aurora's spine straightened defensively. "Call you? The man who'd made it clear he didn't want children? The man who broke up with me because we wanted different things?" Her voice rose with old hurt. "What was I supposed to say? Hi, Cale, I know you hate the idea of kids, but surprise, you're going to be a father, and also can you help me pay rent?" "Aurora? No, you don't get to be angry about this. I did what I thought was best with the information I had. I made it work. By struggling alone while pregnant. By barely making ends meet with a newborn. By being independent. By not burdening someone who'd already made it clear I wasn't worth staying for." The words hung between them like a slap. Cale felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he confronted the magnitude of his mistakes from the previous year. From the living room came the sound of Isadora waking up, her soft whimpers quickly escalating to full-fledged cries. Aurora immediately moved toward the sound, but Cale caught her arm gently. "I'll get her. Finish your coffee." "Cale, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He found Isadora in her bassinet, red-faced and indignant about being left alone. The sight of her father immediately calmed her cries to manageable fusses. "Hey, beautiful girl," Cale murmured, lifting her carefully. "Are you hungry? Or do you just want some attention?" As he changed her diaper with movements that had become natural over the past 2 weeks, Cale's mind raced through options. Aurora was too proud to accept charity, too independent to let him simply solve her problems with money. But there had to be a way to help without making her feel like she was losing control of her life. "Daddy's thinking," he told Isadora as he carried her back to the kitchen. "Mommy's stubborn, but Daddy's stubborn too. We'll figure something out." Aurora was sitting at the table, staring into her coffee cup with the defeated expression of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. "Move in with me," Cale said without preamble. Aurora's head snapped up. "What?" "Move in with me. My penthouse has 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a view of the Sound. There's plenty of space for both of you." "Absolutely not." "Aurora, be practical." "Be practical." Aurora stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "You think this is about practicality? You think I can just move in with my ex-boyfriend like we're roommates sharing expenses? We're not ex-anything anymore, Aurora. We're Isadora's parents. This is about what's best for her." "Don't." Aurora's voice was warning. Don't use our daughter to manipulate me into a situation I'm not ready for. Cale felt frustration building in his chest. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to help you. By putting me in a position where I'm completely dependent on you? Where you hold all the power and I'm just, what, your kept woman? The mother of your child who lives in your house and owes you everything? That's not what this would be. Then what would it be, Cale? Aurora's eyes blazed with emotion. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you swooping in to rescue the helpless single mother. And what happens when you decide this domestic fantasy isn't working for you anymore? When you realize that living with a baby means sleepless nights and crying and mess and chaos? Do I just get evicted from your life again? The accusation hit harder, because it contained a kernel of truth. Cale had made decisions about their relationship before without consulting Aurora, had assumed he knew what was best for both of them. I wouldn't do that, he said quietly. You did it before. I was an idiot before. I was scared and selfish and I made the biggest mistake of my life. Cale stepped closer, Isadora still in his arms. But I'm not that man anymore. Being her father has changed me, Aurora. You both have changed me. Aurora looked at him for a long moment and Cale could see the war being fought behind her green eyes, the desire to believe him battling against the fear of being hurt again. I need to think, she said finally. How much time do you have to decide about the house? 60 days, but I need to start looking immediately if I'm going to find something decent. Then you have 60 days to decide about my offer too. Cale, no strings attached, he said firmly. Separate bedrooms. You'd be my tenant paying whatever you're comfortable with. I'd help with Izzy, but only as much as you want me to. And if it doesn't work out, I'll help you find somewhere else. Aurora wanted to say no. He could see it in her face. But he could also see the exhaustion, the worry about providing for Isadora, the practical reality of Seattle's housing market. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of me? Of depending on you? Of letting Izzy get attached to having you around every day and then having it all disappear? Cale looked down at his daughter, who was contentedly chewing on her fist and observing the conversation with the serious attention of someone trying to understand adult emotions. I can't promise I'll be perfect, he said. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or that this won't be complicated, but I can promise you that I'm not going anywhere. Whether you live with me or across town or in another state, I will always be Isadora's father, and I will always make sure both of you are taken care of. Aurora wiped away tears she didn't remember shedding. This is crazy. Maybe. But maybe crazy is what we need. From his jacket pocket, Cale's phone buzzed with what was probably the 15th call from his assistant that morning. Hospital business, board meetings, research grants, all the things that used to define his entire existence. He ignored it. I have a counter-proposal, Aurora said suddenly. I'm listening. 2 weeks? A trial run. I'll stay at your place for 2 weeks while I look for other options. If it works out, we can talk about something longer term. If it doesn't, no harm done, Cale agreed. But Aurora, yes, it's going to work out. I promise you that. As if to seal the deal, Isadora chose that moment to reach out and grab both her parents' hands, creating a tiny human chain between them. Aurora laughed despite her tears, and for the first time since she'd opened that eviction notice, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. But neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the photographer inside capturing every moment of their intimate family scene. By evening, those photos would be in the hands of someone who had very different ideas about Cale Whittemore's future. Cale's penthouse overlooked Elliott Bay with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the Seattle skyline look like a living painting. Aurora had been there before, many times during their relationship, but walking through the door with Isadora in her arms and suitcases behind her felt surreal, like stepping into an alternate reality where everything had gone differently. The guest suite is this way, Cale said, leading her down a hallway lined with medical awards and abstract art. I had some baby furniture delivered yesterday. I hope I got the right things. Aurora stopped in the doorway of what had once been Cale's home office, her breath catching. The room had been completely transformed. A white crib sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. A changing station occupied one corner, stocked with everything Isadora could possibly need. A comfortable rocking chair faced the view of the water, with a small bookshelf nearby filled with children's books. Cale, she whispered, this is beautiful. I may have gone a little overboard, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I wasn't sure what she'd need, so I bought everything the store recommended. Aurora walked over to the crib, where a mobile of delicate butterflies turned slowly in the breeze from the air conditioning. Each butterfly was painted in soft watercolors, reminiscent of her own artistic style. "Did you paint these?" she asked, touching one of the butterflies gently. "I tried. They're terrible, but I thought—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "I thought she should have something beautiful to look at, something that reminded her of her mother's talent." The gesture was so thoughtful, so completely unexpected, that Aurora felt tears building behind her eyes. This was the Kale she'd fallen in love with, the one who noticed details, who remembered that she'd once said butterflies were symbols of transformation and hope. "They're perfect," she said softly. Isadora chose that moment to wake up from her car seat nap, blinking up at the new surroundings with wide, curious eyes. Aurora lifted her out, and immediately felt the baby relax in the familiar space between her arms. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Aurora murmured. "Pretty fancy digs, huh?" Kale watched them both, a softness in his expression that made Aurora's heart flutter dangerously. "Are you hungry? I ordered dinner from that Italian place you like on Pike Street. You remember my order? Penne arrabbiata, no cheese, extra garlic bread." His smile was tentative. Some things you don't forget. They settled into an easy evening routine that felt both natural and strange. Kale proved surprisingly adept at multitasking, feeding Isadora while Aurora ate, then taking over baby duty while she unpacked her meager belongings. The penthouse was large enough that they could coexist without stepping on each other, but intimate enough that Aurora was constantly aware of his presence. "I have to go to the hospital for a few hours tomorrow," Kale said as they settled Isadora for the night. "Emergency surgery that's been scheduled for weeks. Will you be okay here?" "Of course, I'm not helpless, Kale. I know, He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to be comfortable. To feel like this is your home too, at least for the next 2 weeks." Aurora looked around the nursery, taking in all the careful preparations he'd made. "Why are you trying so hard? Really?" Kale was quiet for a moment, watching Isadora's chest rise and fall in the peaceful rhythm of sleep. "Because I lost both of you once through my own stupidity. I won't make that mistake again." The honesty in his voice made Aurora's defenses waver. She'd spent so long protecting herself from hoping for too much that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely cared for. "We should get some sleep," she said, stepping back from dangerous emotional territory. "Aurora?" Kale's voice stopped her at the doorway. "Yes? Thank you for trusting me enough to try this." She nodded and headed to her own room. But sleep was elusive. The bed was comfortable. The room was quiet. But her mind raced with questions about what they were doing and whether she was making another mistake. Around midnight, Isadora's cries echoed through the baby monitor. Aurora was immediately alert, but by the time she reached the nursery, Kale was already there, lifting their daughter from her crib with practiced ease. "Hey, princess," he murmured. "Did you have a bad dream?" Aurora watched from the doorway as he settled into the rocking chair, Isadora immediately calming against his chest. The sight of them together, her dark-haired daughter, and this man who was learning to be her father, stirred something deep and complicated in Aurora's heart. "She likes the rocking chair," Aurora said softly, entering the room. "I've been reading about sleep patterns in infants. Apparently the motion reminds them of being in the womb." Kale's voice was barely above a whisper. "Go back to bed, I've got her." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Sleep, Aurora. You need rest." Aurora hesitated, then settled into the window seat across from them. "I'll just stay for a minute." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Seattle's city lights twinkle beyond the windows while Isadora drifted back to sleep. The intimacy of the moment, the three of them together in the peaceful darkness, felt dangerous and wonderful at the same time. "I used to imagine this," Aurora admitted quietly. "What?" "When I was pregnant. I'd picture what it would be like if you knew about her, if you wanted to be part of it. Late-night feedings, rocking her to sleep, being a real family." Kale's hand stilled on Isadora's back. "And now? Now I'm terrified that it's too good to be true." Before Kale could respond, his phone buzzed on the side table. He glanced at it, frowning at the unknown number, then declined the call, but it immediately rang again. "You should take it," Aurora said. "It might be the hospital." Reluctantly, Kale answered while still holding Isadora. "Dr. Whittemore." "Doctor, this is James Morrison from Seattle Metropolitan News. I'm calling to get your comment on some photos that came across our desk." Kale's blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what photos?" "Photos of you and a young woman with a baby, taken outside a residence in Capitol Hill. Our source says the woman is Aurora Wren, your former girlfriend, and that the baby is yours. We're planning to run the story tomorrow unless you'd like to provide a statement." Aurora saw the color drain from Cale's face and immediately stood up, alarm bells going off in her head. "I have no comment," Cale said tightly, "and I'd advise you to be very careful about publishing unsubstantiated claims." "So you're denying the relationship? Denying that the child is yours?" "I'm not denying or confirming anything. This conversation is over." Cale hung up and immediately turned to Aurora. "We need to talk." What was that about? But even as she asked, Aurora felt sick. She'd been in the public eye briefly during her relationship with Cale. The local society pages had loved photographing the brilliant surgeon and his artist girlfriend. She'd hated the attention then, but this was worse. "Someone's been watching us, taking pictures." Cale ran a hand through his hair, careful not to wake Isadora. "A reporter just called asking about you and Izzy." "Oh God." Aurora sank back onto the window seat. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "Aurora." "No, Cale, I can't do this. I can't have my daughter's picture in the tabloids. I can't have reporters calling and asking questions about her paternity. It's going to be okay. I'll handle it." "How? How are you going to handle photographers following us around? How are you going to handle them digging into my background, my finances, my pregnancy?" Aurora's voice rose with panic. "I'm not equipped for this kind of scrutiny." Cale carefully placed Isadora back in her crib, then turned to face Aurora fully. "Listen to me. I will protect you both. I have lawyers, security." "Security?" Aurora laughed bitterly. "Do you hear yourself? We need security because someone took pictures of us being parents? Aurora, please. Don't let them scare you away." But Aurora was already shaking her head. "I knew this was a mistake. I knew I shouldn't have gotten caught up in playing house with you. This isn't playing house, this is our family." "Our family?" Aurora's voice cracked. "Cale, we've been trying to co-parent for exactly 2 weeks. That doesn't make us a family. That makes us two people who slept together and accidentally made a baby." The words hit Cale like physical blows. "You don't mean that, don't I?" Aurora stood up, pacing to the window. "What exactly are we doing here, Cale? What do you think this is?" "I think this is two people who love their daughter trying to figure out how to give her the best life possible." "And what happens when the novelty wears off? When the reporters get bored and move on to the next story and you realize that domestic life isn't as appealing as you thought? That's not going to happen. You don't know that. You can't promise that." Cale stepped closer to her, his voice intense. "I can promise that I will never abandon Isadora, and I will never abandon you. You did it before." "I didn't know about Isadora before." "So what? You only care about me because I'm the mother of your child? If I hadn't gotten pregnant, you'd still be perfectly happy to have nothing to do with me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the unresolved hurt and confusion of their past. Cale opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, realizing that any answer he gave would be wrong. "That's what I thought," Aurora said quietly. From the crib, Isadora stirred restlessly, as if sensing the tension in the room. Both parents immediately focused on her, their argument momentarily forgotten in the face of their daughter's needs. "She's okay," Aurora whispered, gently stroking Isadora's hair until she settled back into sleep. When she turned back to Cale, her expression had shuttered closed. "I think it's best if Izzy and I go back to my place tomorrow." "Aurora, please. Don't make decisions when you're scared and angry." "I'm not angry, I'm realistic." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you for tonight, for taking care of her. But this, us living together, pretending to be something we're not, it's not fair to any of us. What we have isn't pretend." Aurora looked back at him one more time, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Isn't it?" She left him standing in the nursery with their sleeping daughter and the wreckage of another conversation that had gone terribly wrong. But what neither of them knew was that the photographer who had started this latest crisis was working for someone much closer to home than a gossip columnist, someone who had very specific plans for Dr. Cale Whittemore's personal life, and who wouldn't hesitate to destroy an innocent woman and child to get what they wanted. The next morning, Aurora was packing Isadora's things when Cale's phone rang again. This time he recognized the number, his attorney David Chen, who only called with serious problems. "Cale, we need to talk. Now." David's voice was tense. "Can you come to my office immediately? I'm dealing with a personal situation." "That's exactly what we need to discuss. How quickly can you get here?" 20 minutes later, Cale sat in David's downtown law office while his attorney spread photographs across the mahogany conference table. The images showed every moment of tenderness between Cale and Aurora over the past 2 weeks. Him buying baby supplies at Target, carrying Isadora into the penthouse. The three of them at Aurora's kitchen table looking like a perfect family. Where did these come from? Cale asked, his voice deadly calm. Victoria Ashford. The name hit Cale like ice water. Victoria Ashford, heiress, socialite, and the woman his father had been pressuring him to marry before his death 3 years ago. Victoria had made her interest in Cale clear at numerous medical galas and charity events, but he'd never reciprocated. Apparently, she hadn't given up. What does Victoria want? David slid a formal document across the table. She's prepared to release these photos to every major news outlet in Seattle, along with some very unflattering speculation about your fitness as chief of neurosurgery, unless you agree to her terms. Cale scanned the document, his blood pressure rising with each line. She wants me to end all contact with Aurora and Isadora, to deny paternity publicly, and to announce your engagement to her within 6 months. She's positioned this as protecting your reputation and the hospital's interests. David leaned forward. Cale, she has powerful allies on the hospital board. If this becomes a public scandal, let it become a scandal. Cale's voice was steel. I won't abandon my daughter. Think about this rationally. Your position at the hospital, your research funding, the foundation, none of that matters more than Isadora. David studied his longtime client and friend. What about Aurora? Is this just about the baby, or is there something more here? The question stopped Cale cold. After last night's fight, he wasn't sure Aurora would even speak to him again, but the thought of Victoria forcing him to cut ties with both of them made his chest tight with panic. I love them both, he said quietly. I lost them once because I was too scared to admit it. I won't lose them again. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Aurora was struggling to get Isadora's car seat installed when the doorman called up. Ms. Wren, there's a Victoria Ashford here to see you. Should I send her up? Aurora frowned. She didn't know anyone by that name, but something about the formal request made her nervous. Did she say what this was about? She says it concerns Dr. Whitmore and your daughter. Aurora's stomach dropped. Send her up. 5 minutes later, Victoria Ashford glided into Cale's penthouse like she owned it. Tall, blonde, and expensively dressed, she looked like she'd stepped out of a society magazine. Her blue eyes swept dismissively over Aurora's jeans and paint-stained sweater, before settling on Isadora, who was napping in her carrier. You must be Aurora, Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm Victoria Ashford. I think we need to have a conversation. I'm sorry, but I don't know you and I was just leaving. About Cale, and your situation. Victoria's gaze flicked to Isadora again. May I sit down? Every instinct Aurora had screamed danger, but curiosity won out. What situation? Victoria settled gracefully onto Cale's expensive leather couch and pulled out her phone, showing Aurora one of the surveillance photos. You and Cale have been careless. These images are about to become very public unless something changes. Aurora's hands trembled as she recognized the photo. It was from that first morning when Cale had brought her coffee, when she'd still believed they might find a way to make their co-parenting work. Who are you? Aurora demanded. I'm someone who cares very much about Cale's reputation and career. Someone who understands the pressures of public life in a way that you clearly don't. Victoria's voice was silk over steel. This scandal will destroy everything he's worked for. His position at the hospital, his research funding, his foundation, all of it will disappear. That's not true. He's the best neurosurgeon in the city. He's also an unmarried man with a secret child born out of wedlock. In certain circles, that matters. Victoria leaned forward. But it doesn't have to be a scandal. There's a way to protect everyone involved. Aurora felt sick. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Take your daughter. Leave Seattle. Start fresh somewhere else. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement to make that happen. Victoria pulled out a check already made out to Aurora Wren. The amount made Aurora's vision blur. Enough money to buy a house, to restart her art career, to give Isadora every advantage in life. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that Cale is not the father, and promise never to contact him again. Think of it as a fresh start for all of you. You're insane. Aurora stood up quickly, backing away from the check like it was poison. Cale would never agree to this. Cale doesn't know about this conversation, and if you truly care about him, you'll spare him from having to make an impossible choice between his career and his misguided sense of obligation to you. Misguided sense of obligation? Victoria's mask of politeness finally slipped. You think he loves you? You think this domestic fantasy you've been playing is real? She laughed coldly. Cale Whittemore doesn't do family, Aurora. He's told me himself at every charity gala for the past 3 years. The only reason he's playing house with you now is guilt. You don't know anything about us. I know he turned down the Hopkins Fellowship for you. Do you have any idea what that means? It's the most prestigious position in pediatric neurosurgery in the country. He threw away his entire future because he feels responsible for getting you pregnant. The words hit Aurora like physical blows because they echoed her own deepest fears. You're lying. Am I? Then why did he never mention you to anyone during your relationship? Why did he keep you completely separate from his professional life? Why did he break up with you so easily the first time? Aurora felt tears building, but she forced them back. Get out. Think about it, Aurora. Think about what's best for your daughter. Do you really want her growing up in the shadow of a scandal? Do you want her to spend her childhood knowing that her existence destroyed her father's career? Victoria stood gracefully and placed the check on the coffee table. I'll give you 24 hours to decide. After that, the photos go public and Cale loses everything. But if you choose to leave quietly, everyone wins. Cale keeps his reputation, you and your daughter get financial security, and no one gets hurt. Except us. You'll get over it. Wealthy men have been taking care of inconvenient women and children for centuries. At least this way, it's civilized. After Victoria left, Aurora stood in the middle of Cale's perfect penthouse, staring at the check that represented everything she'd never had. Security, independence, the ability to give Isadora the best of everything. But taking it would mean admitting that everything she'd started to believe about Cale was a lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cale. Emergency at office. We'll explain everything tonight. Please don't leave before I get home. Aurora looked at the check, then at Isadora sleeping peacefully in her carrier, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around her. Victoria's words echoed in her mind. Misguided sense of obligation. Threw away his entire future. Destroyed his career. What if it was all true? What if Cale was only with them out of guilt and she was too in love with the fantasy to see it? What if the best thing she could do for everyone, including Isadora, was to take the money and disappear? Aurora picked up the check, her hands shaking. Outside, Seattle stretched out in all directions, full of possibilities and new beginnings. She could go anywhere, be anyone, give Isadora a life free from scandal and complication. All she had to do was walk away from the only man she'd ever loved again. But this time it might actually be the right choice. Aurora looked at her sleeping daughter one more time, then reached for her phone to call a taxi. Some decisions were too hard to make in the place where all your dreams lived. By the time Cale arrived home with flowers and apologies and plans to fight Victoria Ashford with everything he had, Aurora and Isadora were gone. The only thing left was a note on the kitchen counter. Some love isn't worth the cost. Take care of yourself, Cale. And a check for $500,000, torn into pieces and left scattered across his perfect marble floor. Cale stared at the torn check scattered across his kitchen floor, each piece a testament to Aurora's pain and his failure to protect her. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, calling her number for what felt like the 100th time in the past hour. Straight to voicemail. Aurora, please. Whatever Victoria told you, whatever she threatened, we can fight this together. Just come home. Please. But even as he left the message, Cale knew Aurora wouldn't listen. She was protecting him the only way she knew how, just like she'd protected herself during her pregnancy. And just like before, he was losing everything that mattered because he'd been too slow to act. He called David Chen, his voice raw. Find them. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to hire. Find Aurora and Isadora. Cale, maybe you should take some time to think about this rationally. David. Cale's voice was deadly quiet. Find my family. Meanwhile, across town in a modest hotel near the airport, Aurora sat on the edge of a double bed, watching Isadora sleep in her car seat. The baby had been fussy during the taxi ride, sensing her mother's distress, but exhaustion had finally claimed her. Aurora had driven around Seattle for hours before checking into the hotel, needing time to think without the constant reminder of Cale's presence in every corner of his penthouse. The torn check in his kitchen had been her final answer to Victoria's ultimatum, but walking away from him had felt like tearing out her own heart. Her phone had been ringing constantly, Cale's name lighting up the screen again and again, but she couldn't bear to hear his voice. Not when Victoria's words were still echoing in her head. Misguided sense of obligation. Threw away his entire future. What if it was true? What if she was just another problem Cale felt obligated to solve? A soft knock at the hotel room door made Aurora freeze. It was nearly midnight. Who would be looking for her here? Aurora, it's me. Open the door. Cale's voice sent a bolt of panic through her chest. How had he found her so quickly? Go away, Cale. I'm not leaving without you and Izzy. We need to talk. We said everything we needed to say last night. Victoria came to see you today. I know what she offered, what she threatened. None of it was true. Aurora closed her eyes, fighting the urge to unlock the door and fall into his arms. How do you know what she said? Because I know Victoria. I know how manipulative she can be when she wants something. And what does she want? Me. She's wanted to marry into the Whittemore family name since my father was alive. This is just her latest attempt to eliminate the competition. Aurora pressed her back against the door, tears streaming down her face. Competition? Is that what Izzy and I are to you? You're my family, Aurora. You're the woman I love and the mother of my daughter. The words she dreamed of hearing for so long hung in the air between them, separated only by a hotel room door and the weight of all their misunderstandings. You love me? She whispered. I've loved you since that first day I saw you at the coffee shop, arguing with the barista about fair trade coffee beans. I loved you when you dragged me to that terrible experimental theater performance and made me pretend to understand it. I loved you when you cried during that documentary about abandoned animals, and I loved you when you painted for 16 hours straight and forgot to eat. Aurora slid down the door until she was sitting on the carpet, listening to his voice through the wood. I loved you when I was too scared to tell you, and I loved you when I let pride and fear destroy everything good in my life. I loved you every day for the past year, even when I was trying to convince myself I didn't. And I love you now, sitting in some hotel room because someone convinced you that leaving was the noble thing to do. Cale, I know you're scared. I know you think I'm only here out of obligation or guilt. But Aurora, if you were anyone else's baby's mother, if Izzy belonged to someone else, I would still be here trying to convince you to give me another chance. Aurora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Victoria showed me pictures, Cale. Someone's been following us, documenting everything. She said it would destroy your career if it came out. Let it come out. Let the whole world know that Isadora Wren is my daughter and that I'm proud of that fact. What about the fellowship? The one you turned down? How did you? Never mind. Yes, I turned it down. And I'd turn it down 1,000 times over for the chance to wake up every morning in the same house as my daughter. But it was your dream. Everyone says it's the most prestigious. My dreams changed the night I held Izzy in that hospital room. My dreams changed when I realized what I'd lost by being too much of a coward to fight for you the first time. Aurora heard shuffling outside the door, then the sound of Cale sitting down on the floor. Aurora, I can't make you trust me. I can't undo the year of pain I caused you or take back the stupid things I said about not wanting children, but I can promise you that from now on, every decision I make will be about what's best for our family. Not my career, not my reputation, not what anyone else thinks. Just us. From her car seat, Isadora began to stir, making the soft, whimpering sounds that meant she was hungry. Aurora instinctively moved toward her, then hesitated, knowing that opening the door would mean making a choice she couldn't take back. She's hungry, Aurora said quietly. Then let me in so we can feed her. Together. Aurora looked at her daughter, who was now fully awake and working up to a proper cry. Isadora had no idea about Victoria's ultimatums or career concerns or the complicated adult emotions swirling around her. All she knew was that she needed her parents. Aurora, please. Whatever you decide about us, Izzy needs you right now, and I need to know she's okay. The desperate love in Cale's voice broke through Aurora's last defenses. She unlocked the door and pulled it open to find Cale sitting against the hallway wall, still in his expensive suit from the meeting with his lawyer, but with his hair disheveled and his eyes red with exhaustion and worry. Thank God, he breathed, rising to his feet. Are you both okay? Aurora nodded, stepping aside to let him enter the small hotel room. He immediately went to Isadora, lifting her gently from her car seat and cradling her against his chest. Hey, beautiful girl, he murmured. Daddy's here. Everything's okay. Watching him with their daughter, Aurora felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. This wasn't obligation or guilt. This was a man who loved his child with every fiber of his being. I prepared a bottle before we left, Aurora said quietly, retrieving it from the diaper bag. She should settle down once she eats. They settled into the familiar routine of feeding Isadora, the small hotel room filled with the soft sounds of a contented baby, and two parents trying to navigate their way back to each other. What happened with Victoria? Aurora asked finally. I told my lawyer to prepare a restraining order, and I'm calling a press conference tomorrow to announce that I'm Isadora's father, and that anyone who has a problem with that can find themselves a new neurosurgeon. Kale, you can't do that. Your career will survive, and if it doesn't, I'll start over somewhere else. Somewhere that values family as much as surgical skill. Aurora looked at him in wonder. You really mean that? I really mean that. Isadora finished her bottle and immediately fell back to sleep. Her tiny hand curled around Kale's finger. The trust she showed in her father made Aurora's heart ache with possibility. I tore up her check, Aurora said. I saw. Thank you. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. And for her. Aurora gestured toward their sleeping daughter. Because I realized that no amount of money is worth living a lie. What lie? That I don't love you. That I don't want us to be a family. Aurora took a shaky breath. I've been so scared of getting hurt again that I've been sabotaging everything good in my life. Kale reached out with his free hand and gently cupped Aurora's cheek. We've both been scared, but maybe it's time to be brave. What does being brave look like? It looks like going home together. It looks like facing whatever Victoria throws at us as a team. It looks like building the life we should have had a year ago, if I hadn't been too stupid to recognize what I was losing. Aurora leaned into his touch, feeling safe for the first time in hours. And if the scandal destroys everything, then we'll build something new, something better, something that belongs completely to us. Outside the hotel window, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, full of promise and possibility. Aurora thought about Victoria's threats, about the photographs and the potential scandal, about all the reasons this could still go wrong. But then she looked at Kale holding their daughter with such tenderness, and she realized that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was scary. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, let's go home. Let's be brave. Kale's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Together? Together. But as they gathered their things and prepared to leave the hotel, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the photographer capturing their reunion through a telephoto lens. Victoria Ashford had given Aurora 24 hours to decide. Time was up. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Seattle General Hospital. By 1:30, the main conference room was packed with reporters, hospital administrators, and curious medical staff who had heard rumors about Dr. Kale Whittemore's mysterious announcement. Aurora stood in Kale's office, bouncing Isadora gently while watching the chaos unfold on the monitors showing the conference room. Her stomach churned with anxiety, but her resolve remained firm. They had agreed to face this together, whatever the consequences. You don't have to do this, she said for the 10th time that morning. We could just disappear, start over somewhere else. Aurora. Kale adjusted his tie and turned to face her, his expression calm despite the storm they were about to walk into. I spent a year regretting that I didn't fight for us. I won't make that mistake again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Kale's assistant peered in nervously. Dr. Whittemore, Ms. Ashford is here. She says it's urgent. Aurora's blood ran cold, but Kale's jaw simply tightened with determination. Send her in. Victoria Ashford swept into the office like an avenging angel, dressed in a pristine white suit that made her look both powerful and untouchable. Her eyes immediately fixed on Aurora and Isadora with barely concealed venom. I see you chose poorly, Victoria said without preamble. How unfortunate for everyone involved. Victoria, whatever you think you're accomplishing, Kale began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. I tried to handle this quietly, Kale. Generously, even. But since your girlfriend rejected my offer, we'll have to do this the hard way. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed them a news website already loaded with one of the surveillance photos. The headline read, Seattle's top surgeon hiding secret love child. This went live 20 minutes ago, Victoria said with satisfaction. By tonight, it'll be on every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest. By tomorrow, the medical journals will be questioning your judgment and moral character. Aurora felt sick, but Kale stepped protectively in front of her and Isadora. You're finished, Victoria. I'm calling the police about your harassment. Harassment? Victoria laughed coldly. I prefer to think of it as concerned citizenship. The public has a right to know about the personal lives of the doctors they trust with their children's lives. You're destroying innocent people out of petty jealousy. I'm protecting your reputation from a gold-digging opportunist and her convenient baby. Victoria's mask of civility finally slipped completely. Do you have any idea what the hospital board thinks of this scandal? What the parents of your young patients will think when they find out their surgeon has been playing house with his illegitimate child? Isadora is not illegitimate, Cale said, his voice deadly quiet. She's my daughter, and I'm proud of that fact. Proud? Victoria's voice rose. Cale, this woman has been lying to you for months. How do you even know the baby is yours? Because I love Aurora, and I trust her completely. Love? Victoria spat. You barely knew her when you got her pregnant. This isn't love, it's guilt and misplaced responsibility masquerading as noble intentions. Aurora had heard enough. Stepping out from behind Cale, she faced Victoria with a strength she'd found somewhere deep inside herself. You're right about one thing, Aurora said calmly. Cale barely knew me when Isadora was conceived. But you know what? That doesn't matter anymore. Aurora, Cale started, but she held up a hand. No, let me say this. Aurora looked directly at Victoria. You think you can destroy us by exposing our past mistakes and imperfections. But here's what you don't understand. Real love isn't about having a perfect beginning. It's about choosing each other every day, despite the complications and the fear and the people who try to tear you down. Victoria's face twisted with rage. How touching. But love doesn't pay hospital bills or fund research grants. When this scandal tanks Cale's career, we'll see how long your pretty sentiments last. My career will be fine, Cale said firmly, because I'm good at what I do, because I save children's lives, because there isn't a parent in this city who would refuse my help for their child based on gossip about my personal life. You're naive if you think, no, Victoria, you're naive if you think anyone cares about your manufactured outrage more than they care about their children's health. The door to Cale's office opened again, and Dr. Martinez entered with several other senior staff members. His face was grim as he looked between Cale and Victoria. Cale, we need to discuss the board's response to this morning's news story, Dr. Martinez said carefully. Victoria smiled triumphantly. As I was saying, the board voted unanimously to support you, Dr. Martinez continued, ignoring Victoria's shocked expression. We've issued a statement saying that your personal life has no bearing on your exceptional qualifications as a physician, and that any attempts to use your family against you will be met with legal action. The color drained from Victoria's face. That's impossible. Board members Williams and Crawford assured me that they would consider all perspectives before making a decision, Dr. Martinez finished. Which they did. Apparently, Dr. Crawford's grandson was one of the infants you saved last month. He was quite vocal about anyone who tried to attack your character. Aurora felt tears of relief building behind her eyes as the weight of months of fear and uncertainty began to lift. Furthermore, Dr. Martinez continued, the hospital's legal team has asked me to inform Ms. Ashford that her harassment campaign constitutes defamation and stalking under Washington state law. Security will be escorting her from the premises. This isn't over, Victoria hissed, but her previous confidence had cracked completely. You think this little victory changes anything? You're still just a struggling artist with a baby, and he's still a man who will eventually realize he settled for less than he deserved. You're wrong, Aurora said quietly. I'm not just a struggling artist anymore. I'm a mother. I'm the woman Cale chooses to love every day, and that makes me stronger than you'll ever be. As security arrived to escort Victoria out, she turned back one final time. You'll regret this, Cale. Both of you will. But her threats felt hollow now, powerless against the united front that Cale and Aurora presented. After Victoria was gone, the office fell silent except for Isadora's contented babbling. Dr. Martinez and the other staff members congratulated Cale and welcomed Aurora warmly before leaving them alone. So, Aurora said finally, I guess we're officially public now. Cale pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb Isadora between them. Are you okay with that? I'm okay with anything, as long as we're facing it together. About the press conference, we're still doing it. Not because we have to anymore, but because we want to. Because our daughter deserves parents who are proud of their family. 30 minutes later, Cale stood at the podium in the hospital's conference room with Aurora beside him, Isadora sleeping peacefully in her arms. The questions from reporters were predictable, about their relationship, about the baby's parentage, about the impact on his career. But Cale's answers were clear and unwavering. Yes, Isadora is my daughter. Yes, Aurora and I are together and building a life as a family. And yes, I'm prouder of them than I am of any professional achievement in my career. Dr. Whittemore, called out a reporter from the back. Don't you think your personal choices reflect poor judgment that might affect your medical practice? I think, Cale replied, looking directly at Aurora and their daughter, that learning to love unconditionally has made me a better doctor, not a worse one. Every child I operate on now is someone's Isadora. Every parent waiting in a hospital corridor is feeling the same fear and hope that I feel every day as a father. What about the woman who was escorted from the hospital earlier? Victoria Ashford claimed she was protecting your reputation. Ms. Ashford was protecting her own interests, not mine. There's a difference between loyalty and obsession, between concern and harassment. Anyone who truly cared about my well-being would want me to be happy. After the press conference, as they walked through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, Aurora marveled at how different everything felt. The worried glances from staff had been replaced by congratulations. The weight of secrecy had been lifted, replaced by the simple joy of being a family in public. No regrets? Cale asked as they reached his car. Aurora looked at their daughter, then at the man who had fought for them when it mattered most. Only one. What's that? That it took us so long to get here. Cale smiled and kissed her forehead. We got here eventually. That's what matters. As they drove home through the Seattle afternoon, Aurora realized that Victoria had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't about settling for less than they deserved. This was about discovering that what they deserved was each other, complicated and imperfect and absolutely worth fighting for. But their story wasn't quite finished yet. There was still one more conversation they needed to have, one more choice to make about the future they wanted to build together. And tonight, with Isadora sleeping peacefully in her crib and the whole world finally knowing the truth, they would have that conversation at last. 6 months later, Aurora stood in the nursery of their new home. Not Cale's penthouse, but a Victorian house in Queen Anne with a garden perfect for a growing family, watching Isadora practicing rolling over and reaching for toys on her colorful playmat. "Mama," Isadora babbled, clapping her hands when she saw Aurora approaching. "That's my brilliant girl," Cale said, settling down beside their daughter on the floor. "Look how strong she's getting." Aurora smiled at the sight of them together. Cale had kept every promise he'd made that night in the hotel room. He'd turned down 3 prestigious job offers that would have required travel, restructured his schedule to be home for dinner every night, and learned to change diapers with the same precision he brought to surgery. But more than that, he'd learned to be vulnerable, to ask for help when Isadora's teething kept them both awake for 3 days straight, to admit when he was overwhelmed by the constant responsibility of parenthood, to trust Aurora with his fears about being the kind of father he'd never had. "Aurora?" Cale's voice brought her back to the present. "You're thinking very seriously about something." She looked at him holding their daughter, both of them bathed in the golden afternoon light streaming through the nursery windows, and felt her heart swell with the kind of happiness she'd never quite believed was possible. "I was thinking about that night at the hospital," she said. "When you first held her, do you remember what you said? That she was perfect. You said she was a fighter, that she got it from her mother." Cale set Isadora down to play with her blocks and moved closer to Aurora. "She did. You both fought for this family when I was too scared to know what I wanted. We all fought for it, in our own way." They stood together, watching Isadora stack blocks with intense concentration, her dark hair curling around her face and her eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. She was walking now, babbling constantly in her own language, and showing signs of the artistic eye she'd inherited from her mother. She was fascinated by colors, and would spend long minutes studying the way light played across walls and surfaces. "Aurora," Cale said quietly, "there's something I need to ask you." She turned to look at him and saw nervousness in his blue eyes, not the clinical confidence of a surgeon, but the vulnerable uncertainty of a man about to take the biggest risk of his life. "What is it?" Instead of answering, Cale knelt down beside Isadora's play area and pulled out a small velvet box. Isadora immediately abandoned her blocks and reached for the shiny object with delighted babbles. "Actually," Cale said, "I think Izzy should ask you." Aurora's breath caught in her throat as Cale opened the box to reveal a stunning ring. Not the massive diamond that would have impressed society pages, but a delicate band with a single perfect stone surrounded by tiny sapphires, the color of the Pacific Northwest sky. "Mama!" Isadora clapped her hands as if she understood the significance of the moment. "Isadora wants to know," Cale said, his voice thick with emotion, "if you'll marry her daddy." Tears spilled down Aurora's cheeks as she sank to her knees beside them. "Cale, I know we did everything backwards. I know we had our daughter before we figured out how to love each other properly. But Aurora, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I choose you. Not out of obligation or guilt or because it's the right thing to do, but because you and Izzy are the best parts of me. We're a package deal, Aurora said through her tears. The only package I've ever wanted. Isadora crawled over to Aurora and pulled herself up using her mother's arm, babbling seriously as if she was adding her own opinion to the proposal. I think she approves, Aurora laughed, wiping her eyes. Is that a yes? Aurora looked at the ring, then at Kale's hopeful face, then at their daughter who was trying to grab the sparkling stones with chubby fingers. It's a yes to everything. To marrying you, to building this life together, to being brave enough to believe in happy endings. Kale slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then pulled both his girls into his arms. Isadora squealed with delight at being squeezed between her parents, and Aurora felt the last of her walls crumble completely. I love you, Kale whispered against her hair. I love you both more than I ever thought it was possible to love anything. Even more than neurosurgery? Aurora teased. Especially more than neurosurgery. They stayed like that for a long time. The three of them tangled together on the nursery floor while the afternoon light painted everything golden. Outside, Seattle hummed with its usual energy, but inside their home, time felt suspended in perfect contentment. When did you know? Aurora asked eventually. When did you know you wanted this? Kale was quiet for a moment, thinking. The first time I saw you hold her in the hospital, I knew you were meant to be her mother. But I think I knew I wanted to marry you the night you tore up Victoria's check. When you chose love over security, chose us over the easy way out. That was the scariest thing I'd ever done. It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. Isadora had fallen asleep in the warmth between her parents, her tiny hand clutching Aurora's engagement ring like a treasure. They moved carefully to put her in her crib, then stood together watching her sleep. So what happens now? Aurora asked. Now we plan a wedding. Now we figure out how to merge my surgical schedule with your art career and Izzy's nap times. Now we probably have more children who will disrupt our sleep and steal our hearts. More children? Is that okay? I know we haven't talked about. Aurora silenced him with a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. It's okay. Everything's okay now. As the sun set over Seattle, painting the nursery in shades of pink and gold, Kale thought about the conversation that had started this whole journey. His thoughtless words about children being a prison, overheard by the woman carrying his child. He'd been so wrong. Children weren't a prison. Love wasn't a prison. Fear was a prison. Pride was a prison. The inability to trust someone else with your whole heart, that was a prison. But this, holding Aurora while their daughter slept peacefully nearby, planning a future built on love instead of obligation, this was freedom. This was everything he'd never known he wanted, delivered in the form of a woman who painted butterflies and believed in transformation, and a little girl who had taught him that the strongest hearts could fit in the smallest bodies. Aurora? Thank you. For what? For fighting for us. For believing we could be a family even when I didn't believe it myself. Aurora looked up at him, her green eyes bright with love and mischief. You know what this means, don't you? What? You're going to have to learn to dance for our wedding. I refuse to marry a man who can perform brain surgery but can't waltz. Kale groaned dramatically. I knew there would be conditions. There's only one condition that matters, Aurora said, suddenly serious. Love me. Love our daughter. Love whatever children we might have. Love the life we're building together, even when it's messy and complicated and nothing like what either of us planned. That's the easiest promise I've ever made, Kale replied, sealing it with a kiss that felt like the beginning of forever. Outside their window, the first stars appeared over Elliott Bay, witnesses to a love story that had begun with a medical emergency and bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. And in her crib, 10-month-old Isadora Wren slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams come to children who are deeply loved and completely safe. The brilliant surgeon had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Some things couldn't be fixed with precision and control. Some things could only be healed with love, patience, and the courage to trust in something bigger than fear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love was enough to save everything that mattered most. 2.5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Queen Anne Victorian as Aurora stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while simultaneously wiping syrup from 2-year and 10-month-old Isadora's chin and bouncing 14-month-old Thomas on her hip. The controlled chaos of family life had become her favorite kind of beautiful mess. "Daddy's running late again," Aurora said to her children, glancing at the clock. "What do you think, Izzy? Should we save him any pancakes?" "Save Daddy pancakes," Isadora declared with the authority of someone who had recently learned to use full sentences. "Daddy hungry after saving babies." Aurora smiled at her daughter's understanding of Kale's work. Even at almost 3, Isadora knew that Daddy was a hero who made sick children better, though she couldn't quite grasp the complexity of neurosurgery. What she did understand was that when Daddy came home, he always had time for stories, piggyback rides, and elaborate games of hide-and-seek that usually ended with everyone collapsed in a giggling pile. The front door opened, and Kale's voice carried through the house. "Where are my favorite people?" "Kitchen," Aurora called, setting Thomas in his high chair just as Kale appeared in the doorway, still in his scrubs, but with his hair disheveled and exhaustion written across his features. "Long night?" Aurora asked, noting the tension around his eyes. "Twin boys, 14 months old, car accident." Kale's voice was heavy as he sank into his chair at the breakfast table. "We had them in surgery for 14 hours. Aurora's heart clenched. She knew that look. It was the expression Kale wore when a case hit too close to home, when the patients reminded him too much of his own children. "Did they make it?" she asked quietly, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. Kale's face brightened. "Both of them. Full recovery expected. Their parents." He shook his head, emotion thick in his voice. "I'll never forget the look on their mother's face when I told her both boys would be fine." "Daddy saved babies," Isadora announced proudly, climbing into his lap despite his protests that he needed to shower first. "That's right, Princess. Daddy and his team saved 2 little boys who are going to grow up and cause all kinds of trouble for their parents." Aurora watched her husband hold their daughter, marveling at how completely fatherhood suited him. The man who had once claimed children would be a prison now couldn't imagine life without the beautiful chaos they brought. His surgical schedule had been restructured around school plays and soccer games. His home office was decorated with finger paintings and macaroni art. His expensive suits were often accessorized with mysterious stains and tiny handprints. "Mama, baby Thomas eating his hair," Isadora observed from her perch on Kale's lap. Aurora turned to see their son indeed trying to stuff his own curls into his mouth, a habit he'd developed recently that never failed to make everyone laugh. "Thomas, hair is not food," Aurora said, gently redirecting his hands toward his sippy cup. "He gets that from your side of the family," Kale teased. "I've seen your artistic process. You put everything in your mouth when you're concentrating." "I do not," Aurora started to protest, then caught sight of the paintbrush she'd absent-mindedly been chewing while making breakfast. "Okay, maybe he gets it from me." After breakfast, while the children napped and Kale showered, Aurora found herself in her studio, the converted sunroom at the back of the house where morning light provided perfect painting conditions. Her latest series was her most personal work yet, portraits of families in medical settings, capturing the quiet moments of hope and healing that most people never saw. The collection had grown out of her experience with Isadora's early medical scares and had evolved into something larger, a celebration of the caregivers who dedicated their lives to healing others. The centerpiece was a painting of a surgeon's hands cradling a newborn, titled "The First Touch." It had sold before she'd even finished it, with the proceeds donated to the pediatric wing of Seattle General. "I love watching you work." Kale's voice came from the doorway, his hair still damp from the shower. "You're supposed to be sleeping. You've been awake for 36 hours. I'm too wired to sleep yet. The adrenaline from surgery." He trailed off, settling into the reading chair he'd placed in her studio so he could keep her company while she painted. Aurora set down her brush and turned to face him fully. "Tell me about the boys, the twins. Marcus and Matthew Chen." Their parents had taken them to Pike Place Market. First time the boys had been downtown. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car. Kale's hands clenched involuntarily. "When they brought the boys in, I thought, for just a moment, looking at their dark hair and brown eyes, I thought about Izzy and Thomas. But you saved them. We saved them. The whole team. It took everything we had, but both boys are going to be fine. Their parents can take them home in a few days." Aurora moved to sit on the arm of his chair, running her fingers through his hair. "You know what I love most about watching you with difficult cases?" "What?" "You never distance yourself anymore. The old Kale would have approached those boys as medical puzzles to be solved. But now you see them as someone's beloved children. You operate with a father's heart as well as a surgeon's hands." Kale leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been on duty that night. If some other doctor had been the one to save Izzy. But you were on duty. You were exactly where you needed to be when you needed to be there. You think it was fate? Aurora smiled, thinking of all the seemingly random events that had led them to this moment. His late shift, her decision to move to Capitol Hill, the gallery closing that had made her struggle financially, even Victoria's interference that had ultimately forced them to fight for their love publicly. I think, she said carefully, that sometimes the universe conspires to give people exactly what they need, even when they don't know they need it. What did I need? You needed to learn that control isn't the same thing as strength. You needed to discover that the most important surgeries you'll ever perform are the ones that heal hearts, not just brains. Cale opened his eyes and looked at her with the same wonder he'd shown 3 years ago when he first held their daughter. And what did you need? I needed to learn that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose. Every day, even when it's scary. They sat together in comfortable silence, sunlight streaming through the studio windows and the sounds of their children's peaceful sleep drifting from upstairs. This was Aurora's favorite time of day, the quiet moments between Cale's shifts and the children's demands, when they could simply exist together as partners in the beautiful chaos they'd created. Aurora, Cale said suddenly, do you ever regret it? The way everything happened? Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we'd done things differently? She considered the question seriously. You mean if you hadn't broken up with me? If I'd told you about the pregnancy right away? If we'd gotten married before having children like traditional couples do? All of it. The whole messy, backwards way we became a family. Aurora looked around her studio, walls covered with paintings inspired by their journey, natural light that made her art possible, the reading chair where her husband came to decompress after saving lives. She thought about their children sleeping upstairs in bedrooms decorated with love and care, about the life they'd built that was nothing like what either of them had planned, but everything they'd never known they wanted. No, she said firmly, I don't regret any of it. Even the painful parts, even the mistakes we made. They led us here to this moment, to this family, and this is exactly where I want to be. Even though I was such an idiot in the beginning, especially because you were an idiot in the beginning. It made your transformation into an amazing father and husband that much more meaningful. Cale stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong against her chest. I have something to tell you, he said quietly. What? I've been offered the position of Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It's one of the most prestigious programs in the country. Aurora's breath caught. Cale, that's incredible. You've always said that was your dream job. It was. 5 years ago, it would have been the pinnacle of everything I thought I wanted. Aurora pulled back to look at his face, reading the expression she'd learned to recognize over their years together. But you're not taking it. I'm not taking it. Why? Because my dream job isn't in Philadelphia. It's here, in Seattle, operating on children whose families can walk to our house for dinner after their kids recover. It's being married to an artist whose work is starting to be shown in galleries across the country. It's watching our children grow up in the house where we learn to be a family. Cale, if this is what you really want, Aurora. His voice was firm, but gentle. 5 years ago, I thought success meant being the best surgeon in the most prestigious hospital in the biggest city. Now I know that success means coming home every night to people who love me not because of what I do, but because of who I am. It means being present for the small moments that make up a life, first steps and bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes. And if you change your mind, if you start to feel like you settled for less, Cale cupped her face in his hands, the same hands that had saved their daughter's life and countless others. Aurora Whittemore, he said, using the married name she'd taken with such joy. I could never settle for less than this. This is everything. From upstairs came the sound of Isadora waking up from her nap, her voice calling for Mama and Daddy, with the confidence of a child who had never doubted that both her parents would come when she needed them. That's our cue, Aurora said, but neither of them moved immediately. 1 more minute, Cale said, holding her closer. Let me just hold my wife in the sunshine for 1 more minute. Aurora melted into his embrace, marveling at how the word wife still gave her butterflies after 2 years of marriage. They'd had a small ceremony in the hospital chapel where their love story began, with Isadora as flower girl and Thomas as the world's youngest ring bearer. The only guests had been close friends and colleagues who had witnessed their journey from broken hearts to healing love. Mama, Daddy, Where are you? Isadora's voice was more insistent now, accompanied by the sound of small feet running down the hallway. Coming, sweetheart, Aurora called, but she didn't move from Kale's arms. We should go, Kale said. We should, Aurora agreed. But they stayed for just a moment longer, holding each other in the light-filled studio while their children called for them, and their future stretched out bright with possibility. Because some moments were too perfect to rush, too precious not to memorize, too full of love not to savor completely. As they finally headed upstairs to their children, Aurora thought about the question that had started this whole journey, whether she would have made the same choice if she could do it all over again. The answer was simple. She would choose love, every single time. She would choose the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of building a life with someone who chose her back, even when the choice was difficult. Because in the end, love wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It was about two people deciding that whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. It was about building something beautiful out of broken pieces, something lasting out of moments that felt fleeting, something extraordinary out of the ordinary magic of choosing each other, again and again. And as Isadora launched herself into their arms and Thomas babbled his delight at seeing his parents, Aurora knew that their love story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more growth, more moments when they had to choose each other over fear or pride, or the easy way out. But they would choose love. They would always choose love, because that's what families do. They fight for each other, they forgive each other, and they never give up on the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. As you reflect on Kale and Aurora's journey from a broken relationship to a beautiful family, consider this. When faced with the choice between safety and love, between the familiar and the unknown, between protecting your heart and opening it completely, what would you choose? Would you have the courage to fight for love when everything seemed to be working against you? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.